and we welcome you to another edition of hashtag NBA Together. We've been doing these for 8 weeks now, and they have followed a similar formula, a one-on-one interview for half hour, 45 minutes with an influential NBA voice. And we're going to change things up today. David Griffin was supposed to be the sole subject today of this NBA Together, the executive vice president of the New Orleans Pelicans, who has a great story to tell on his journey through the NBA. But we've had a change in the way we do things today, just given what we've been witnessing for the past 5 or 6 days in this country. And so, David, I appreciate you kind of seeding what would have been a story about you to include your head coach, Alvin Gentry, the VP of basketball operations, Swin Cash, there in New Orleans, and Lloyd Pierce, the head coach of the Atlanta Hawks, who is very involved right now with the National Basketball Coaches Association in trying to calm things down and in trying to take the next step and in trying to do what's right next. So we got a lot to get into. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time today and joining us. And Alvin, I'm going to start with you. What's the dialogue been like with your team? Because I know teams around the league are always Zooming and everybody's catching up and finding out how everybody's doing in the course of this pandemic. And now this. So what have the conversations been like?
Well, you're right. I mean, mostly, we've talked about, obviously the players want to know the date when we're going to get started again and when is this going to be over? And then all of a sudden, the murder that happened in Minnesota put all of that on the back page. So we've done a lot of texting, talked to some of the guys personally on the phone. The thing that we've got is that Swin does a great job. I mean, not a good job. She does a great job of keeping everybody in communication with each other and with her and as well as, Dave and the team and stuff. So we've talked about it a lot. There's been a lot of questions. And I think right now, what most of our players want to know, I think as well as all the players around the league is like, what is going to be done? What is the next step? And that's where I think Lloyd comes in. He's done a great job. We were on a call yesterday or 2 days ago where after the call, I called him up. I thought he did an unbelievable job of saying, yeah, we know this happened. We know this happened. Now, what is our next step? What are we going to do that's going to be sustainable? And I think that's the key word right there. What is going to happen that's going to be sustainable from here?
Let's get into that phone call a little bit, Lloyd, and let's get into the Committee on Racial Injustice and Reform. What can you do right now? What's job one?
I thought job one was communication. And, I think as Alvin talked about, the pandemic has already created some alternative options of how we have to stay connected as an organization, whether it's, Alvin and David speaking or Alvin and Swin and relating that to the players and having a platform. We've used Zoom to exhaustion at this point and staying connected. But, this issue is it's such not a unique, I think it's unique in the setting that we're all sitting here and we're forced to sit and watch what's going on in our world. And, now how do we communicate with each other? And that was the challenge of getting the head coaches together, because I've had a challenge of getting our players together for a while and then learning that I need to reach out to my assistant coaches, both black and white, about what's going on. And when we met on Saturday, it was great that we had the amount of support from every head coach in that meeting. But I felt encouraged, but I felt it may have been the first time of vulnerability being expressed by everyone about the same thing. And we all want and have a desire to do something about it. I don't know if we've ever communicated that to each other. And so it's easy to say, this is what I want to do, and this is what this city should do, and we're going to follow suit. It's a great start to know that if we're putting our heads together on this issue, tackling this issue together, then we can start spreading it out. We need to be unified. We need to be unified as a coaching staff in order to unify our players, in order to unify our league, in order to include our owners, in order to use the media. But we have to start as leaders in this organization to be on the same page. And that was the goal for step one on Saturday.
Swin, I saw one of your posts that this won't change without everyone in it together. And if we want this country to be better, all hands on deck. All hands on deck with the purpose you see in mind. What would be the first thing you want to see happen that would indicate to you, okay, people get it?
Well, the first thing I would say is the acknowledgement of there is a problem. I think a lot of times people look at whether it's racial injustice, whether it's systematic racism, and they say, well, that's not my problem, or, how can I do anything to fix that? And the first thing is through communication, through having conversations. I think the second thing is to realize that there's a lot of work to be done, not only in our smaller groups, in our families, in our workplace. We could have an impact in the smaller groups first before even taking it to the bigger groups. Because a lot of times, one of the things that I learned playing in the WNBA is that we had players from all different backgrounds, international players. But when we decided to take a stand and say that Black Lives Matter across the league and across the board, it wasn't just the Black players that decided it. It was the white players that decided it. It was the international players that decided it. And we all were willing to make a sacrifice. And so what I've tried to relate to our players is that we hear you, we see you, and we understand that you all need to communicate with each other and understand each other. And that's the way you're going to come together, be united. Because some of our players, one of the things that I've learned, Ernie, is that they want to have the conversations, they just don't know what to do. And some of our players want to donate, right? So they make an impact, they donate money, and they say, okay, what's next? And then people are hitting them on social media and they're saying, well, you're not voicing it loud enough. You're not posting enough about, George Floyd or Breonna Taylor. You're not doing this, you're not doing that. And what I've tried to say to all our guys is just doing something right now is the first step. It's the first step, and making them feel okay, because sometimes when you get on social media and you get caught up, it's never going to be enough. But if you're unified together and we're step by step moving in the right direction, I think that having that level of solidarity will bring about the change that we want to see.
And with that answer, you get a very good idea of why David Griffin hired Swin Cash. David,
Ernie, can I say something to her point about the conversation?
Sure. Yeah.
I think that's a very valid point. And one of the things that's really troublesome when you hear someone say, well, why was George Floyd arrested? Why was he even in that position? It doesn't matter. If he was being apprehended and arrested, it doesn't matter. That happens. We get that. That's why the law enforcement is in place. What we saw does matter. And I've been telling people all along, we're trying to understand, was it racist? Was it justified? Not just George's incident, but so many others. I was scared. I was in a lot of anger, and it brought about a ton of fear when I watched the lady weaponize the African-American man, or potentially try and weaponize the police on the gentleman in New York, out at the Bird Park. And we still don't understand why that's so important, because we're not talking about how scary that moment was when she did what she did. People won't acknowledge that is happening. It's real. The reason why this week is so impactful is because the people that are afraid to acknowledge what happened in New York is real, saw the consequence of what potentially could happen. It happened the next day in Minnesota, based on what she was trying to do Sunday in New York. And so to have that conversation, a lot of people are afraid to do it. I've spoken to people that say, I don't know what to say. I haven't felt what you feel. And so I don't know. We have to have the conversation. You need to understand that it's real. You need to understand that it's an issue before we can even talk about action, because you're not going to believe the action. You're not going to buy into the action because you haven't had the conversation. You don't realize that it's real. And that's a serious part of how we move forward, is having that dialogue and that conversation from bottom to top, top to bottom, and everywhere outward that we can express it, and to say it loud.
And Ernie,
No,
if I could
go
just
ahead.
follow on that. One of Lloyd's former teammates, Steve Nash, came out with a statement on social media today saying that this is a white issue. This isn't a black issue. This is a policing issue. This is an issue of how we're socialized in this country. I did not personally need to see another black man murdered on national television to watch 8 or 9 minutes of him pleading for his life to know that racism and murder are wrong. I knew that, but I'm ashamed to say it might be what it took to make me recognize there's a big difference between statements on social media and actions that you put into your own life to change those things as a white person in this country. Ernie, you and I have lived a life of privilege that other people don't get to live. And part of the price we pay for that is that when something like this happens, we have to analyze exactly what systems are in place. And as Killer Mike said, plot, plan, and strategize and mobilize on how we do something to make it change. Because it's not changing until white people decide it changes. And when on average 15% of the voter turnout in major cities show up for local elections, that's how this happens. President Obama came out with a statement today about the impact of local elections on your police force, on incarceration rates. Those things matter. And until we start to pay attention at home and really get involved and draw votes for local elections and things that impact our people on a daily basis, and as white people of leadership positions like myself and yourself, Ernie, leading that and helping other white people understand it, this isn't going to change. And we're really blessed to live in a community like New Orleans that has an African-American female mayor. We have an African-American police chief. We have an incredibly diverse ethnic mix here in New Orleans. And we have a diverse mix in our staff for that very reason as well. The more disparate voices we get in conversations, the better those conversations are and the better results they yield. We can no longer think this is something of angry black people. This needs to be angry white people who aren't going to allow this to happen anymore.
And to the point you make there, Griff, too, our society, in my mind, tends to be so insulated and so just focused on hearing the voices they want to hear. So, okay, you're a CNN guy, you're a Fox News person, and you've never seen the other one. You've never even attempted to see, what are they saying over there? Why do they feel that way?
And I would tell you, Ernie, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I would tell you that even CNN and Fox, because they're so polarized, even if you watch the other, you still never find the middle. We never find common ground. Everything is so polarized now, we're afraid to disagree with one another in any forum.
Yeah, and I think it behooves us to read things and listen to things that make us uncomfortable. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with learning something new that might help you to understand where somebody's coming from. I mean, Adam Silver says, you know, this moment requires greater introspection for those of us, including me, who may never know the full pain and fear many of our colleagues and players experience every day. We need to do everything in our power to make a meaningful difference. And I think sometimes when we've gone from, in the last few days, like a feeling of hopelessness, then where do Where do we go to a place of hope? And what are the small steps we can take that say, okay, because I think it's very intimidating to say, we need to fix systemic racism. How are you going to, is it a matter of, let's take this step and this step and this step? Alvin?
Well, I think the first thing is that, and I think you said it best, and really everyone is pretty much saying the same thing, is that it start with communication, and it start with uncomfortable communication, really. I think you've got to be willing to talk about things face to face that makes people uncomfortable. I'll put them in a tough situation. I was just talking the other day on our call about, it is unbelievable that in the year 2020, I have to talk to my kids about, if you get stopped by the police, then this is what happens. You make sure you got your hands on the steering wheel. You take the key out of the car if it's not, or if anything, you roll down your window and you stay in that position until he gets there and ask a question. There's millions of people that will never have that conversation with their kids. But it's unbelievable that in the year 2020 we have to do that. But you do have to do that, because I would rather him do that than all of a sudden, be in a body bag because he got stopped by a cop. And the other thing I think that we have to understand is that this is a selected few. This is not the entire police force. This is not anything like that. But we have to find a way to weed out those selected few. I think we talked about it the other thing. There's got to be more accountability in general from the police force, and it have to be with a civilian, committee that oversees something about this. Then that's what it has to be. But we have to have those conversations. We have to have uncomfortable conversations, and then we have to figure out what is the next step from there. But it all starts with the communication part, I think.
And Ernie, I think one of the two words for me, one is accountability, which Alvin said, and accountability has to be not only with how the police force, it's how you're policing, right? Accountability when things go wrong. Black and brown communities are not saying we don't want the police here. The police are supposed to do their job. But when you don't do their job at any job, whether it's your job, my job, Coach Lloyd's job, anybody's job, you don't do your job, there's an accountability. Either you're going to get fired or you're going to have to answer for something. So right now, there doesn't seem to be a solid accountability, and that goes to legislation. That goes to how we're funding in different ways. It goes to areas that we can change. It also goes to accountability with our elected officials. If you have a mayor, if you have a police chief, if you have, senators, people that are supposed to be voting in your interest and they are not, then you have to vote and change to get somebody else in there that is making sure they're doing things in your constituents' interests. And I think the last thing is proper training. We never ask the real questions of, okay, before we give somebody a 9mm or a gun, before we ask them to go out and how to de-escalate situations, are they getting the proper training to be able to do that? See, because for me, all I hear all the time is when a young Black man is pulled over, well, he started talking loud, he started doing this or doing that. And I say, okay, when somebody's pointing a gun at your head, you're telling me that you're supposed to have a certain level of composure, but the person holding the gun can scream and do all these different things, and that's okay. And so we have to start looking at these things, not just in kind of like this tunnel vision, but we have to look at them as overarching things that we can change that'll make people feel more comfortable in communities. And I just want to say and give this small example. I spoke to one of our players who, him and his wife also are trying to figure out how to talk to their kids. So now you have young kids that are watching cops on television doing these things. And the kids said to the family, why are the cops doing this? The cops are the good guys. Why are they hitting that man like that? So now our players have to have conversations with younger kids. So this isn't just happening at the adult level. It's also happening with younger kids that some of them are being raised to think firemen and cops and everybody else are really good people. But when you see what's happening across the TV, it has to hit your heart to know that that's not what's supposed to be happening. We're not supposed to see police running into crowd with vehicles. We're not supposed to be seeing this. So now it has to start with two things: better training and accountability.
Griff, what was, what was your weekend like? Were you tuned in all the time? Were you watching coverage from around the country? Did it get to a point where you said, I can't watch it anymore right now? Or and what were the thoughts that you had as these cameras went from Philly to Washington to Atlanta to Minneapolis to LA to San Francisco?
So I talked to some of our players this morning about that. And really my overwhelming sentiment was it's an incredible convergence of events that we're living through right now. I mean, this is an absolutely unprecedented time in human history. And we're given an opportunity right now. All this adversity creates an opportunity for us to change our outcome. And I was really overwhelmed with watching all of this against the backdrop of people being sheltered in place because of COVID. And globally, the scientific community is galvanized, trying to fast track a vaccine. But within our own communities, we can't be galvanized and working together to end this scourge of hate. I mean, literally, we've got politicians running on a platform of hate right now and divisiveness, and they continue to get elected by doing that. So I was really struck by, we've got the global community working to save our lives, but within our own communities, I don't know that we're taking enough action to make those lives worth saving. And that really is what scares me more than anything else.
Where's the voice of calm we need right now?
Boy, that's a great question.
The voice of calm right now, when you don't have leadership that's all the way at the top, it's going to have to be a collective effort. It's like any other team. It's sometimes you have a captain and you're like, you know what, that team's following that captain. But when there's a void of having a captain that's there, you get other voices that have to step up in order to steady the ship right now. And so I think that the people, like Griff said, that are willing to understand the times that we're in, dealing with a freaking pandemic at the same time that we're dealing with this, racial injustice and hate that's happening, we have to be on all fronts. And I think sports right now and the NBA, how it's led in so many other ways, has to be one of those voices. And I think our players get that. I think our coaches get that, our staffs get that. And so we're used to being role models out there on a court. Now we have to be role models in real life and make sure that the people that are following us and following our teams see that we care about them more than just them buying tickets and coming to our games and buying our jerseys.
Yeah, to that point, Ernie, and what Swin said is absolutely true. And, for the past month, all of us have been trying to figure out and pass on information to our players about resuming the season. And we realize it's close because of the pandemic and what we've dealt with. This issue is, I haven't talked about coronavirus in a week. I haven't worried about coronavirus in a week. And what I'll say is, one of the things that has motivated me is we have a huge platform as a coaches association. Players have a tremendous platform with their social media outlets and their media accessibility. The owners have an even larger platform with their resources and their connection and their finances. And so, yes, sports brings us together. It gives us a sense of hope when we know the season is coming back and we're going to see NBA basketball again. To me, the real calm that we can display is our unity in addressing this issue that we're dealing with right now. Not just bringing sports back, but bringing sports back so that people realize and understand, however many people watch The Last Dance is however many people we need to attract to let them know that we are in this fight together and we are committed to this fight. And it's a fight that will be sustainable by the NBA, by the Coaches Association, by the players, by the media. That is our greatest challenge right now, is to take advantage of this opportunity with our platform to address something that has been looked over for far too long. We're having to see it up close and personal, but now we need to take advantage of the opportunity. We do media appearances and we do different appearances, and our players go down and do autograph sessions. If we can get 1,000 people to show up to a player's autograph session on a Saturday, why couldn't we get a player's appearance at a voting poll in our respective cities and get that same attendance when it's time to really change laws and address the legislation that Swin talked about earlier? That's how we have to use our platform.
I spent a good chunk of Sunday night on the phone with Charles, and then Kenny, and then Isaiah Thomas, and then Chris Webber. Um, and guy, I mean, you know what? I was just saying, I'm so frustrated. I'm so heartbroken. I'm so at a loss for how to wrap my head around what I'm seeing. And I told him one of the things that was troubling for me is, I think the most effective protest shines a spotlight on an action. So the reaction shines a light on the action. And what we're seeing with destruction and looting and whatever's being done by like these outside forces is making the reaction obscure the action. So no one's talking about the man's name anymore. Nobody's talking about George Floyd. They're saying, look what they did here. Look what they did here. Is there any way of getting through and creating calm with the agitators from far left and far right?
But I think, Ernie, I think that's the whole purpose of what is going on, is to disrupt what should be about George Floyd. It should be about him. It shouldn't be about all of this other stuff. But you have people who are intentionally hijacking, what is going on, which should be a peaceful situation, which is what everybody tried to organize it as, a peaceful demonstration. And I think these people are there for the sole purpose of disrupting anything that may be organized or may be calm. And we have to understand that also. We have to understand that, these people are trying to deliver a point of, look, this thing is totally out of control. It's totally out of control. And we don't want that. I mean, I think the mass majority of the people in those particular cities that live in those cities, there's a calmness they want to have about it. And they start out organizing these calm rallies, and you get all these outside people that's not letting that happen. And we have to understand that. And we have to take the focus away from that and get the focus back on what we're organizing and what we're protesting for.
Lloyd, you saw that firsthand right down the street from where you live.
Yeah, and I've been asking myself the question of who's actually out there, because it is. I do believe the initial protests were about peace and about the frustration and not seeing, officers arrested and sentenced or charged at least. But the longer this goes on and the further it expands out to the different cities, is it just about George Floyd now? We've dealt with the pandemic, and even in the same African-American communities where people are dealing and living in fear, they've also been living in a disparity with regards to health and the socioeconomic disparities that we have. They've had to deal with this throughout the coronavirus issue. And so these people are unemployed. They don't have healthcare access. They're seeing Black men murdered. They're angry. And so there are peaceful protesters out there, but there's also a very angry community where it's all hitting them at once. And so, yeah, we're being distracted by a few select individuals that are now coming in and disrupting that. But there's an angry group of people out there, and we need to have that conversation as well. That's not, George Floyd isn't the only conversation with regards to the African-American community and being murdered by police officers. There's a lot of things, like Swin said, the interaction with law enforcement, the inability to have healthcare access and education. That's why we don't know how to communicate. That's why it's hard for an officer who doesn't understand that to go in that community and doesn't realize there's so many other struggles that these people, African-American communities, minority communities, are dealing with. When you go in there, you need to understand that. So if they're loud and they're violent or they're angry or they're frustrated and you're trying to talk to them and you've got a gun pointed at them, they've already got a lot that they don't have a lot of hope at that moment. And so there is a disconnect because you don't understand what you're seeing when you go up to these people in their communities. And that's why we're seeing what we're seeing on TV. I'm not condoning the looting and the rioting, but I understand there's anger in a lot of people right now.
I think to a large degree, to the point you're making, Lloyd, we basically ripped the scab off of what's really at work here. George Floyd was just the tip of the iceberg. And again, it speaks to the existing power paradigm that has always been in this country. The game plan is we will vilify the people that are protesting one way or the other. So by even a few people turning it to looting and doing the violent things they're doing, it diminishes the power of the protest because you've given the weapon to the person who wants to use it to vilify the very people and the very things that people are protesting for. So we know the game plan. We know what the textbook looks like. So one of our action steps is we cannot feed into that. We can't give people the arsenal to use against us in terms of vilifying us. The protest has to remain as peaceful as possible because we know what they're going to do, what the power structure will do to demean what's being protested for. So that's one, I think that's really important. And two, again, it's the action steps we take. How do we address all of these things in totality? And I think the only way, to Ernie's point about feeling helpless, is to do what you can do locally to educate in any way you can. The people that you live with, white people having conversations with our friends, talking about how we impact this. It starts with the smallest amount of change. And we have to begin that process because this is much, much larger than George Floyd. And Lloyd made that point very well.
And Griff, I think to that point, with our platform, I would love to see Flint, Michigan, like I saw yesterday, and the police officer protesting with the people. I would love to see Camden, New Jersey. That's our platform. We have the ability to show what's not being shown and change the narrative as to why people are protesting and how they should be protesting. To see that is beautiful, and to understand that there are people that are protesting with George Floyd on their minds.
No, Lloyd, that's exactly where I was going to go too, and I'll get you in 1 second, Griff. But that is those moments when they were captured yesterday. And basically, it was law enforcement saying, "I get it. You're pissed off, and I know, and I'm with you, and I'm doing what I have to do here, and you're doing what you need to do here, and let's do this together." And that to me is that point that can be so hard to reach. But in some instances yesterday, you saw that reached, and it was good for the soul.
And to the point Alvin made, there are so many heroes working in the police force around this country, people that are doing it the right way, that are representing people in the right way and in powerfully positive ways. And showing more of that, Lloyd, I agree, is really critical. What happened in Flint, Michigan was really, really powerful. What happens here in New Orleans, where our police department not only was not violent in their response to protest, but put a protective barrier around those protesters so no one else brought violence against them. That's a story that isn't told, and it's not shown enough. And again, it's one of those things I talked about with the polarization of media. All we want to show are this is bad and these people are bad. And we're not going to solve this until we start to come to the middle.
But I think Lloyd makes a good point too, that we have to start with baby steps. We have to say, this is the good part, look at this right here. This is good. This is good. We're not going to be able to throw an umbrella over it and solve the problem, all together at once. We have to take these baby steps, and we have to include the law enforcement, because like I said, there is a lot of good policemen out there, and we can't loop them into one group either. But we have to get the ones that are not credible out. And how we do that is that's one of the things that to me is the biggest thing. How do we as citizens, how do we as NBA coaches that have a voice, how do we put the pressure on everybody else that these people are eliminated? we don't get to have 12 screw ups before we're fired. You know, this guy had 12 screw ups before, and he's still a police officer. That doesn't happen in any other situation where you get 12 screw ups and you're still a police officer. You know, that shouldn't happen. And how does that happen? We need to get to the root of how that is happening, you know, where these guys are able to have all of these complaints against them, but they're staying on the job. That shouldn't happen. You know, it's just not the way it works in our country. It shouldn't be. And so some kind of way, to me, you know, like I said, that's an area where we've got to figure out, you know, who's monitoring them and how is this happening? Who's training? I think Swin said it, you know, how are they being trained? You know, and why do they have a situation where you can do something 12 times and still have your job? And that's what that's one of the things that got to be taken care of.
And I think one of the other stories, and I agree with us showing kind of both sides of how there are, you know, police officers that are trying to do the right thing. And one of the most powerful videos I saw yesterday, Ernie, was from New York, where there was a young woman who was on her knees, on her hands, putting her hands in the air, protesting. And a cop walked by her and he just shoved her. And then out of nowhere comes another cop, an African-American woman, and she just was pushing him to the back and getting him out of there and going off. And this was all caught on video and the crowd started cheering. And it really touched me in my heart, because a lot of times there's this whole kind of blue shield where it's like, you know, cops, we stick together. And I'm like, there's no cops sticking together. It's not like that. You stick to what's right. And if the community feels that people are sticking to what's right and what's lawful, then they have a better trust in you. And there just has been a trust that has been broken in the Black community with the police force. And it's just not in one, it's not in one city, it's across the country, because the police force was never set up in a way that was for everybody. And we know that if you know the history of our country. So I do agree that there are baby steps that can be taken. But I think right now, our country is crying out for bold steps to be taken. And if you want bold steps, then you get to the polls locally and nationally and figure out how you change it. I mean, that's just the one step that we have, because silence right now is violence to me.
I'm going to go around the table one more time as we wrap this up, but as we get there, I want to read you something from Monty Williams, who wrote this in The Athletic today, in part. I'm angry, I'm afraid, and I'm in pain. To those who have sworn to protect and serve all people, regardless of color, religion, or sexual orientation, I say thank you. We have an institutional problem with pervasive racism. It must end now. To those who are using the facade of a protest or march by choosing to destroy and tear down, I challenge you to be better. I'm not calling you out, I'm calling you up. Destruction of property and life is not the answer. And he closed with a C.S. Lewis quote, says, you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. And Monty's one of my all-time favorites, a guy who has endured a lot in his life and has always, with grace and resolve, has gotten to the other side. Just wonder what do you think when you hear what I just read from him? And I encourage everybody who's watching this to get on The Athletic and check out what Monty Williams wrote, because it is poignant, it is touching, and it's right on the mark. What'd you think, Alvin?
Well, be a better human. Be a better human. There you go, right there. I mean, I don't think anything else needs to be said. I mean, just understand and try to be a better human. And there is, and I think Lloyd said it also, there's angry people out there, and we've got to try to understand them too.
It's justified. It's justifiable anger.
And we've got to try to understand them too. So everything is not going to be this calm, okay, hey, nonviolent, you know, here we go, let's walk in peace and things like that. There are angry people out there that have every right to be, because of the situation that they're in right now. And so I think we got to understand collectively, you know, what's going on. And it's not going to be, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, now everything is done. It's going to be a hard process. And there's going to be things, there's going to be ups and there's going to be down. I keep using the word sustainable. We use that, Griff used that the first time he got here, you know, sustainable winning. Well, we got to have sustainable effort to make sure that this thing, some kind of way that we can solve this problem. And it's not going to be short term, but we got to have sustainable effort in making sure that we get to the bottom and get to a solution with this.
Swin, you're up next. What am I going to walk away with from you right here that makes my day better?
I'm going to do a plea. I'm going to do a plea, Ernie. And as an African-American woman with a young son, I'm not asking for more for my son than your son. All I'm asking is for him to have the same equal chance as a young white boy in this country. And in order for him to do that, in order for him to have that same life, in order for him to have those same equal opportunities, I need your help. I need your help. To all of the mothers out there, to all of the men that are out there who don't look like me, who don't look like my son, I need your help to make this country better. And that's my plea, because I can't sleep at night. I worry about my son. I worry about him having a button nose and smiling right now and becoming 6'6" like his dad, and people looking at him as a threat. And the only way to change that is if everybody unites together and figures out how we're better as a country. And until that's done, I still will not sleep at night because I'll be worrying about my child. So my plea is for everybody to have all hands on deck right now.
Just as you did as a player, you delivered. Lloyd.
You know, Swin said something earlier, silence is violence. And with that, silence is complicit. And, you know, as I've spoken to a number of people about this issue specifically the last week or so, one of the things I've learned is they've felt my passion, they've felt my emotion. I've been vulnerable. I've expressed to Black and white individuals that I am in fear and I need help. We need help for me to overcome this. You may not, Ernie, you and Griff may not experience what I've felt or feel at various times throughout every single day, not just incidents, but every single day. But I think you need to hear that I feel that way. I think you need to understand that I feel that way. I'm not asking you to go through that experience. I wouldn't wish that upon anyone. But when I say it, I want you to understand how I feel. And because of that, you know, one of my assistants who is white and has a teenage daughter, he was able to have a conversation with his daughter for the first time about her role with privilege as a white woman, potentially growing into a white woman, and how she could change the outcome and not become the woman in the New York park. He had to have that conversation for the first time because he felt my vulnerability. And so I can't be silent and I can't be complicit because it leads to violence. And so whatever I'm feeling, I need to share, and we need to have these conversations. And I've learned that about myself, and I hope everyone learns about where they are, regardless of their race, regardless of their gender, and what role they play in helping us all make change, like Alvin said, from where we are. Not trying to change, or like Monty said, not trying to change the history of it, but where we are right now and what we can do as a result of where we are and what we understand.
No, those words by Amy Cooper the other day, and just the feeling that all she had to do was mention African American, like this will legitimize what I'm saying. It sickens anybody who saw it. And if that doesn't give you an idea of what is systemic, just watch that video. Griff, this was supposed to be about you today, but I will give you the last word. You know, we're supposed to talk about your career and going from Phoenix in 17 years and a title in Cleveland, and now we got Zion and New Orleans, and I appreciate you saying that's not where we need to go today. So wrap it up for us.
Well, I'm really grateful that I got to be part of this today. It was far more meaningful, and absolutely nobody wanted to hear about that first part anyway. I'm really overwhelmed. The story Lloyd told about his coach having the conversation with his daughter. Swin and Alvin have heard me say this often. When you raise a family and you build a team, you have to love each other enough to tell each other what they need to hear, what you need to hear. And I think, Ernie, as white males in this society, we need to tell each other we need to be better. It starts with us. Everything that comes next starts from, we have to acknowledge there is a problem. We have to decide we want to do something about it and that we are going to be accountable. It doesn't need to be anybody but us that work first to act on this. And so from an action step standpoint, I would tell you, you must get involved in your local politics. You must turn out and vote out the people that are doing things that make you ashamed of being a white person in this society, because it happens all the time and we ignore it. So what I would say to everybody is love each other enough to challenge each other and make each other be better. And it's incumbent on us to lead that, Ernie. And I don't know how to go about it. I really don't know even the next step I take, but I know we have to do more. And I think it could be as simple as just start from a place of love.
Well said, and a great place to leave it for today, at least. David Griffin and Alvin Gentry and Lloyd Pierce, Swin Cash. Much thanks for your time and for your wisdom and for your heart. Let's move on. Let's make it better. Let's be better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, EJ.
Thank you. Thank you, EJ.